Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 22nd of October. Today we have some updates, so let's start. First we're going to start with LPR, with the north of LPR region, or with the east of Kharkiv area. As you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area. The Russians are shelling this area heavily, and today we got report and we have some kind of marker on this map that the Russians started a massive counter-offensive operation in this area. We didn't have any updates about this exact area where the Russians started their counter-offensive operation because the front line is very long. It starts from Seversky Donetsk River and it ends somewhere in Dvoriechye, so it's a very big front line. If we're talking about the Ukrainians, they made few attempts of counter-offensive operation in this area. They were trying to attack the Russians in direction of Kuzyumovka. They were trying to cross river Zherebets in the area of Novodyane. There are very heavy clashes on Terny and Tarskoy front line in this area. This is the only bridgehead that Ukrainians have in this area, and the only bridgehead that they are able to use to start any offensive operation in direction to the road that connects Kremenaya and Svatovo, these two towns. So, as you can see, there are a lot of icons saying that there were very heavy clashes during the day. The Russians reported that as a result of these attacks, the Ukrainians lost around 80 soldiers and something around 15 armored vehicles. This bridgehead is very important for the Ukrainians, but the problem is that during the first phase of this special operation, when the Ukrainians were retreating from this area, they destroyed every single bridge in this area. And the Russians, of course, didn't restore those bridges. They were, I'm not sure what, if we're talking about supplying and supporting of this area, the Russians moved their armored vehicles and tanks using the north direction from this area, and the Russians didn't move their tanks on any type of armored vehicles from Kremenaya in direction of Liman. So for now, this is the reason why the Ukrainians have such losses in this area. First of all, it's very difficult to move armored vehicles, tanks, very heavy armored vehicles on this bank of the river. And this is the reason why the Russians are so successful, because from their side they are able to use tanks, they're able to use artillery, they're able to use helicopters, they're able to use everything they have, and so that's why they're so successful. So I repeat myself, as a result of clashes in this area, the Ukrainians lost around 80 soldiers and something around 15 armored vehicles. The same story is all along the front line from, let's say, Novodyane towards Dvoriechye. The Ukrainian losses, it's a Kupinsk front line, we can say. The Ukrainian losses is around 20 soldiers and 5 armored vehicles. The question is, what are the plans from both sides? And if the Russians started this counter-offensive operation, let's say there is like an icon saying that the Russians are pushing in direction of Terny, Yampolovka and Tarskoye. I understand the situation that the Russians are doing this just with one purpose. First of all, we need to understand that because of retreating and because of stepping back during the Liman defense operation, the Russians were forced to accumulate a lot of forces in this area. And to tell the truth, this is like unnecessary powerful fist, unnecessary. There is no need in such big forces in this town, but the only need why the Russians accumulated such a big number of forces in this area is because of the fact that Ukrainians have bridgehead on this area. So that's why the Russians, as I understand, want just to clear this bridgehead to establish entire control over this area between Seversky Donetsk and Zherebets River, and to push the Ukrainians on the west side of Zherebets River. And this situation will allow the Russians to reduce the quantity, the number of their forces in this area, and then they will be able to move their forces to the north. Why the Russians need or would move their forces from this area to the north, and the question is why the Russians can't continue their offensive operation from Tarskoye, from this bridgehead in direction of Liman. The answer is the same why the Ukrainians aren't so successful on this bridgehead, because there are no bridges in this area, and the only thing the Russians are able to do is just to move light infantry in this area. Maybe they're able to, I don't know, somehow, but using the dams along the Zhiribets River to move armored vehicles, light armored vehicles. I don't think the Russians are able to move a big number of tanks in this area. And if you remember, during the first phase of offensive operation of storming Liman, if you remember, the Russians got Liman somewhere in May, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you remember, the Russians stormed Liman not from Zarechno-Tarskoy, not from these directions. The Russians were storming Liman from the north, from town like Drobyshevo, Stavki, from Debrilova, Shandrigalova. I remember those battles for Shandrigalova, for Novoselov, for Dirilova, for Drobyshevo, for Stavki, Kolodizy. So the Russians were moving from the north, and this is the same reason why the bridgehead around Zarechna is useless, because it's highly unlikely that they are planning to use this area to attack. But from the other hand, if we're talking about the north, you see that there are a lot of job to do. You see that almost entire bridgehead is returned by the Ukrainians, and they are still there. They still have possibility to move forces on this bridgehead. I believe that they have already prepared fortification. So it's a very long story. If the Russians want to take back Liman, first they need to clear everything on the north, because there are just fields, there are just roads, and there is no problem with moving forces, with moving tanks, artillery, armored vehicles, and the only one way to attack Liman is from the north. And if you remember, even let's one more time talk about Liman. When the Russians first took Liman, they attacked from the north, and when the Ukrainians returned Liman back, they also first were trying to attack Liman from the south, but all their attacks were failed. They had a lot of losses. You remember the numbers. And that's why the Ukrainians made a decision to attack Liman from the north. So as you can see, it's just a practice, it's just the experience. We understand it's the same town that the Russians anyway will try to take back, but anyway it's just possible to do from the north. If the Russians are able to take Liman from the south or from the east, I believe it will be some kind of magic trick or some kind of very special operation if they are able to do something like this. So that's why first of all they need to move the Ukrainians from these bridgeheads onto this area. Then they will be able to reduce forces who will be located along the Zhiribets River in Tarskoy and all these towns. There are going to be a lot of fortification trenches, and after that they will be able to reduce the number of forces and move them to the north. But from the north there are a lot of things to do, but the Russians have already started doing something, because as you know, there are very heavy clashes around Dvorechna. This is the beginning point if we're talking about storming of Liman, of returning back of this of the area between Oskol River and Zhiribets River. The starting point is Dvorechna and this area, and the Russians have already started this operation, as you know, during this week. They returned town like Gorbovka and the villages around this town, and now they just need to take control over Gnianovka, Dvorechna. I'm not sure if they are able to do this, because there is like a forest, and I believe that this forest is mine. There are a lot of Ukrainians, they managed to move a lot of forces, but anyway, if they want to develop their offensive operation, they need to be on the safe side, on their flanks, in their back. So that's why they need to push the Ukrainians back on that side of the river. Then they will be able to move to the south, to clear Kupiansk, and move south and more and more. But the question is, do the Russians need all these things, or maybe the situation like this is totally nice for them? I believe that this situation is not good for the Russians. First of all, even if the Russians are able to establish the front line along Zhiribets River anyway, even in this case they need to keep a lot of forces in this area, because if you compare Zhiribets River and Oskol River, these two rivers are totally different two rivers. And if we're talking about Oskol, we understand that there is a small part of front line where you need to keep forces, let's say from the Russian border to the Kupiansk, and then there is a very wide river, and it's like highly unlikely that Ukrainians are able to cross this river just using the bridges. And then we are moving to Svetogorsk, and so I understand that if the Russians want to be on the safe side, if they want to save their army, and if they want to be flexible and have possibility to move their reserves on other front lines, they need to push the Ukrainians back to Oskol Oskol River, and then try to prepare the defense line along this river. If you're talking about the Ukrainians, they're pretty good. They're on the safe side. This front line is very nice for them, because I believe that during the heavy clashes along Zherebets River, I believe that the Ukrainians are preparing defense line along Oskol, because they understand that sooner or later they will be forced to step back, to move back, but till that time, by the time they will be able to prepare a very nice defense line along the Oskol River, and it's highly unlikely that the Russians will be able to take Izium back in the very near future. Maybe they will be able, but maybe at the end of next year or something like this. If we are talking about Seversk, Bakhmut front line, as you can see, there are also a lot of icons. The Ukrainians, the Western source reported that the Russians trying to attack Solidar to crack this area to establish control, but for now there are no progress in this question. The only progress they have is in the south of Bakhmut. As you can see, the Western source map has been updated, showing us that the Russians are very close to Klishchevka, Andreevka, and Kurdyumovka. And furthermore, as you can see, according to this update, we see that the Russians during the previous hours were trying to storm Azaryanovka. And if they're able to do this, of course, starting from this moment, they will be able to move to the north and all the time to attack this area from, let's say, at least 3 sides. And of course, this is the main task that the Russians have, and if they're able to do this, of course, the situation near Bakhmut will be changed again in Russian favor. And after that, finally, we will be able to close the question with Mayorsk station and this part of Zaitsev, because for now, I'm not sure that this map showed the correct information, because according to the Russian sources map, this territory, at least all these territories under Russian control, there is just a small part in the south of this area, station Mayorsk, and some part of blocks in Zaitsev is under Ukrainians, and the rest of this town is under Russian. But if you take a look at this map, even this territory is in the gray zone. Small difference, but anyway, with taking control over this territory by the Russians, they will be able to solve also a lot of issues, and the main goal for the Russians in this area, of course, to split the front line in 4 parts. For now, we can say that there is one single front line from Bakhmut to Toretsk, this one, but if the Russians are able to move and develop their offensive operation in the middle between these 4 towns, that means that with help of that they will be able to split this front line into 4 separate parts, and that means that Ukrainians will be forced to have almost the same number in every single town. And as the second thing, that they won't be able to understand where the Russians will attack the next time. So this is the thing that the Russians are planning to develop, and we see that this operation takes a lot of time from the Russians, but believe me, if you remember, Popasna fell somewhere in April, in the beginning of May, or maybe in the end of April or something this time, and the Russians, it took around 3 months to take just a small village like this, and after that we saw a great development of the front line. The same situation with Bakhmut. As soon as this area falls, we're going to see a great development and progress along the front line in this area. If we are talking about Donetsk, in particular about this area, there are no changes in this area. The map hasn't been updated, but we are receiving almost every single day during the previous week more and more updates from the Vremivka, as the Russians call this area, Vremivka Tactical Bridgehead. This like the Russians call this small village, Vremivka Tactical Bridgehead. It's very important, by the way, for the Russians. It's a very important area, and according to the Russian sources, if we take a look at the Russian sources, you're gonna see that Vremivka is not under Russian control according to this map, but I remember that the authorities of DPR reported about establishing control over this area, so I believe, and I must say, that at least Neskuchna and Vremivka is under the Russians, and this bridgehead is very important, and it's very important for many reasons, and the most important one, that from Vremivka the Russians are able to pin down the Ukrainians who is located in Velika Novoselovka, in this town. And if we take a look at the map of this position, you're gonna understand why this bridgehead is so important. This is our Velika Novoselovka, and if we're talking about this area, there are at least 1st Battalion, 1st Tank Brigade, there is the 71st Jaeger Brigade, there is Motorized Brigade, there's 7. So there are a lot of forces. 59th Motorized, another Jaeger, and also there is a 53rd Mechanized Brigade, and their main base, their main fortification is Velika Novoselovka. As you can see, according to this map, this town is located between 2 rivers. It's a very nice position to protect, but there is one problem, and the problem is Vremivka, because Vremivka is located on the high land, and from this area it's very easy to establish fire control over Velika Novoselovka and control this town. We haven't received a lot of update about Velika Novoselovka, but something tells me that this town is already reduced to ruins, and I believe that because of the fact that Ukrainians increased the number of counter-offensive operations in direction of Vremivka tactical bridgehead, I believe that it's not some kind of a panic, but it's some kind of situation when they don't have any other option. Because if they are not able to get control over Vremivka back, that means that they will be forced to leave Velika Novoselovka. And if Ukrainians leaves Velika Novoselovka, it will be a very, very big problem for them, because from Velika Novoselovka, it's like Popasna, it's like Bakhmut. After that, the Russians will be able to develop significantly their bridgehead along this area, and then they will be able to move a lot of reinforcement, and from this area they will be able to develop their offensive operation to the north or to direction to Kurakhova. So anyway, and by taking Velika Novoselovka, they will be able to solve issue with such towns like Marienka will be solved, Novomikhailovka will be solved, and the most important, Ugledar area will be solved. So this is the most important town, and now we see more and more clashes for this area. And the Russians reported that during previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians made another attempt of counter-offensive in this area, and they lost around 25 soldiers, something around 7 armored vehicles. Not so much, of course, not so much, but if we're talking about battles day by day, every day they're losing. I'm not sure, and I don't know about the Russian losses. Nobody reports, and the Ukrainians don't provide such information. But anyway, I believe that something tells me that if we're talking about particular this front line, the situation plays in Russian favor. And as you can see, the position here is very nice. There are a lot of natural barrier like this river that protects the Russians from attack from the flank. This one. Furthermore, there is another river in this area that moves along this area to Vremivka, so the Russians are able to prepare some very nice fortification along this river. Furthermore, there is a road that on the Russian side, and they're able to receive some support supply without a problem. So this bridgehead is like a pain in Ukrainian. I'm sorry for the next. And so that's why this area is very important, and the Ukrainians, they need to return back over this area. If we're talking about the another Zaporozhye towns, there are no changes. They're just artillery duels, no movements, and so on. Now we are moving to Kherson. Today from Kherson we received another important update. And there is an icon about that, and calls like evacuation Kherson. Today we got update, and today we got a piece of news that it was like if we were talking about evacuation process yesterday, or the day before yesterday, or the previous days, we were talking about if you want, you are able to evacuate, and the Russians are not pushing or pressing. But today we received like evacuation process as must. Now it's like as must process, and the Russians, it's not just like asking or something like this. They demand civilians to evacuate from this area as fast as possible. And if we're talking about the entire clashes along this area, the Ukrainians made the same attempt at the same place, trying to split this area, the Russian position, in two parts. The first one, Petykhatki, Borozenska, in this area, the second one, the south. They were trying to attack the same direction, and they were defeated one more time, and the Ukrainian losses were around 130 soldiers, something around 24 armored vehicles. As you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area showing the real picture, the real situation. The Ukrainians are attacking this area using the HIMARS system, but the Russians reported that they are able to shut down around 90% of all those rockets. There were another attempt of attack, as you can see. and the Ukrainians made another attempt to attack Pravdina. The previous one was very unsuccessful for the Ukrainians. They lost a few convoys of their armored vehicles and so on. So situation is critical, but the Russians decided not to wait the critical time, the critical days. They decided to at least somehow to make all the damage that Ukrainians are able to do to this region as less as possible. The first thing they did, there is like a dam, and this is the most important thing, Novokakhovskaya Dam, and as we discussed before, the Ukrainians, according to the Russians version, the Ukrainians want to destroy this dam, and we saw, I showed you the video, and with help of this destroy, they will be able to flood this area with water, and everything will be underwater for 3, 4, 5 days in this area. And this will reduce the Russian possibilities, their artillery possibilities, their supply support possibilities, and so on. And during this time, the Ukrainians, of course, want to achieve as much as possible success in this area. So what did the Russians decided to do? First of all, they decided to... the Russians have started dumping water. They did one thing, they opened some doors in this dam, and they increased the level of water by themselves. So they want to. I'm not sure about the success. Is it a nice idea or not? But anyway, with help of that, the Russians decided to reduce the level of the water in this reservoir. And even if the Ukrainians, by the time the Ukrainians will destroy this dam, I believe the Russians want to reduce the level of water as much as possible. And another thing, I believe that they also want to reduce the level. Maybe because of the fact, because we discussed about 2 ways how the Ukrainians are able to destroy this dam, using the mines or using the submarine drones. Maybe by reducing the level of the water, they it will give them possibilities to spot these mines or submarines and to see them better than they can do this right now. I don't know, but anyway, they made a few steps. They are not waiting when the critical situation comes. So, and this, of course, this is very good for them. If we're talking about yesterday, the day before yesterday, we saw that the Russians stopped attacking the energy facility of Ukraine, but starting today, they attacked the Ukraine one more time, and some sources are saying that the level of attacks that we saw today is almost at the same level that we saw on the 10th and 11th of October, when was the highest pressure on the Ukrainian energy facilities. Today, the Russians were attacking mainly the western part of Ukraine and the south part of Ukraine. And as you can see, they were trying to do one important thing. As you can see, there is like red icons of there's like of blows. There's like a very light red icon and like dark red icon. So the light icons shows the area where the Russians were attacking today, and as you can see, they were attacking the area around Rovinska nuclear power plant, and they were trying to shut down and cut this power plant from the west of Ukraine, from the area where the Ukrainians receive the main support and supply from the Western countries. So we understand that the Russians' main goal is not to shut down electricity and not to allow the Ukrainians to charge their mobile phones, cell phones. The main goal that the Russians want to achieve is to press the Ukrainians to start negotiation. And if they are not planning to start any negotiation, the Russians want to destroy, to reduce the railroad possibilities, Ukrainian possibilities. If they can't stop, if they are not planning to start negotiation, then they need to reduce the supply possibilities of Ukraine. And today, as you can see, they attacked the Rovinsky nuclear power plant lines that connect this power plant with the rest of Ukraine. And this another one where we see attacks around Yuzhno-Ukrainsk nuclear power plant. In this area, as you can see, there was an attack on the west-north from this power plant, and in Odessa. And all these power plants are connected with this South Ukrainian nuclear power plant. So as you can see, the Russians today were trying to attack and reduce the energy facilities around the power plants. And if we come back to this map, you see these like fire icons around Odessa, around Pervomaisk, around Yuzhno-Ukrainsk power plant. And today we got report that almost entire Ukraine was blackout without electricity and so on. If yesterday, before yesterday, we were talking about the fact that Ukrainians lost around 30-40% of energy possibilities. I believe that starting today we can say that Ukraine lost up to 50% of their energy possibilities, and that's a lot. And a lot of military experts from Western countries are saying that it will take months or maybe sometimes years, up to a year, to restore the damage that Ukrainians had during the previous days and previous week in October. And as you can see, the Ukrainians, maybe because of these attacks, maybe because of problems in energy sector, they can't start the real offensive operation. Nowhere. Not in the Kherson district. They can't do this in LPR district as well. Maybe they won't be able to do this at all. Who knows? But anyway, we'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.